Hi, I'm Randy Fitzsimmons. I'm your Washington Realtors legal hotline lawyer. This is another video in our series entitled Winning the Battle Offer Without Losing the War. And something I often hear from brokers is, I've done this for years. I've done this dozens of times and I have never had a problem with it, or my buyer has never gotten in trouble from it. And you know, that's true. Think of the thousands and thousands of transactions that close every year, and fortunately there is a small handful of lawsuits that get filed every year. So there are way more transactions that close successfully than those that end in a lawsuit. But guaranteed, if you were to ask the brokers involved in that small handful of lawsuits that get filed each year, if they wish they had done something differently on the front end to avoid the lawsuit, would they have done that? But I guarantee you that if you asked that small handful of lawyers who are involved in those transactions that result in lawsuits every year, if they wish that they had done something differently to avoid the lawsuit, certainly their answer would be yes. And here's the thing. Typically, whatever you have to do to avoid the lawsuit is really a very small thing. It's just change. It's just doing something differently, and that often is so hard for all of us to grasp. Change is hard. So, as you listen to this series and think about these ideas, please don't just automatically dismiss them because that's not the way I've done things and I've never gotten sued yet. Think about how you can go forward to not only protect yourself and your firm, but to protect your buyer as well, because that's really what this video series is all about. Okay, today I want to talk about brokers writing unrealistic closing dates on their buyer's offer so that sellers will be attracted to that purchase and sale agreement because of the anticipation that they're going to have a closing in 20 days, for example. If your buyer has to get financing to close the transaction, the chances of you closing in 20 days is remote at best. Now, I'm not going to say there's not some lenders out there who don't have magic wands and who can't make that happen, because there are. But I've also talked to brokers and maybe lenders who've said that the promises have been made up front, but the promises can't be maintained. And maybe it's not even the lender's fault. Maybe it's a title problem. Maybe it's an appraisal problem. Maybe it's a stack up at the escrow office problem. Who knows what? But when you've got a really short closing date and a lot of things that have to happen, buyer is set up to be in a position where buyer must have an extension in order to close the transaction. What's the risk to buyer in that? It's twofold. Number one, seller may, as many sellers have started doing, extract a fee from buyer in order to extend the closing date. You want an extension, you're going to pay an extra $5,000. It's not an additional $5,000 earnest money. It's $5,000 closing date extension fee. It's just an increase in what buyer is going to pay in order for buyer to get what buyer originally bargained for, which was the right to purchase the property at the negotiated purchase price. Why are they in this position? Because an unrealistic closing date was established on buyer's offer and seller accepted it. There's potentially even a bigger risk to buyer. Let's say that when buyer goes to seller and asks for an extension, maybe it's just a few days extension. Seller says, no, I'm not extending. If you can't close, then you can't close. I'm not extending. Why would a seller say that? Well, in today's market, a seller would say that because seller's got a backup buyer who's willing to pay $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 more than your buyer. And seller has been hoping that your buyer would be unable to close the transaction. And so when your buyer says, I need an extension, seller says, no. So what does that mean to your buyer? Well, obviously it means they lost the house. In addition, they lost the money that they paid for an inspection. They lost the money that they paid for an appraisal. If there was a loan application fee associated with this property, specifically, they've lost that. In other words, they've lost all of their not only emotional and time investment in this property, but their financial investment in this property. So buyer brokers, writing an unrealistic closing date in an effort to win the offer battle could certainly result in a huge loss of the war. I understand the psychological value of writing the offer with a unrealistic closing date. You need to make sure that both you and your buyer understand the risks associated with having an offer accepted that includes an unrealistic closing date. If you have questions on this discussion or any other question, send an email to me, legalhotline@warealtor.org. Thank you for being a Washington Realtors member.